Today we're going to learn Eruvin Daf Ayin Vav. We're going to start at the bottom of Ayin Hamud Bet. We'll finish the sixth parak and move on to the seventh. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Ravua Amar Rav. Shtei chatzerot v'gimel batim benehem. If you have two courtyards and there's three houses in between, so we'll pull up the picture and we'll understand what they're talking about. We have a house on one side. We'll call it house A with a courtyard. Then we have a house on another side. We'll call that house E. So we're going to have A, B, C, D, and E, 5 altogether. So what A is in a courtyard and E is in a courtyard. When you go out of the courtyard in between each of them, okay, there's a space in between, there's a street. As you see in the picture, there's a street in between. When you walk out of the courtyard into the street, immediately you're in a house. That house leads to another house, that house leads into another house, and that house leads to the other courtyard. So you basically have a row of B, C, and D that all open up into each other and each open up into each of the courtyards. So if you want to make an Eruv, what do? A goes through B and puts his Eruv in house C, and E goes through house D and puts his Eruv in house C. How does this work? B and D just function as entryways into C. So they're just like a beit shar, like a gateway entrance. So they're not even considered houses, so they don't need to be part of the Eruv, meaning you can carry in there even if they didn't give any food. Normally, every house has to give food. But this house is considered what we call a beit shar, and we saw before, beit shar doesn't, if you're living in someone else's beit, I own the house and you live in my gatehouse, you don't have to be part of the Eruv. Emtsa'i, what about the middle guy? Why doesn't he have to give any food? We already learned this. If you're the house where the Eruv is, you don't actually have to give any bread. So basically we end up with only the outer people have to put the bread in, and then we have an Eruv perfect. Now, Badik Lahu Rechava le Rabbanan. Rechava asked Rabbanan the following question. He asked the rabbis, he checks them out, and he asks them this difficult question. What if, in this case, it works very well because C is in the middle of B and D, and B and D function as entranceways into C. But what if there were only two houses in the middle? And what if, okay, there's a what if, this isn't, you should go do this, but what if two courtyards with two houses in between, and we're going to have A, B, C, and D. A puts his Eruv in C, and D puts his Eruv in B. So each one walks through. A walks through B to get to C, and D walks through C to get to B, and C and B don't put their Eruv in, right? They don't put any food in the other house at all. So they're not part of the Eruv. So what happens? Kanu Eruv Olo. Does this work or not? Do we say each one is looked at, right? When the Eruv is in C, so we look at B as the Beit Shar. When the Eruv is in B, we look at C as the Beit Shar, right? So can we view them as, for this purpose, you're a house. For the other purpose, right, for the side of one Eruv, you're considered the house because the Eruv was put in by you. But when it comes to the other courtyard, you're considered the Beit Shar, and you're just an entranceway, and therefore you don't forbid anything. So can we say that? In other words, each one can function as both. Amrulei, shnehem lo kanu eruv. Nope, doesn't work. Neither of these Eruvs work. Why? Manafshach. Because either way you look at it, it's a problem. If you want to call it a Beit Shar, we already learned that you can't put an Eruv in a Beit Shar. So you can't call this a gate for one purpose, but then on the other hand, put the Eruv there from the other one. And if you're going to call this a house and say, well, that's why I'm putting the Eruv there. But when it comes to the other Eruv, which is the house next to you, and they pass through your house to get there, you're going to have a problem because you're basically carrying your Eruv through a house that you're not allowed to carry in. Now, what does this mean? You carry your Eruv before Shabbat, but there's actually a prohibition or a requirement. In order for something to be an Eruv, it has to be able to go through all the houses that are in the Chatzir, let's say. So in this case, if A and C are part of the Eruv and B is not, right? And B is functioning as this house, because B is a house because it has a different Eruv in there. Can't call it a Beit Shar. So when you want to carry your food from C to A, you can't, because you can't walk through B because B is forbidden to you because B isn't part of the Eruv. So basically, you can't have a situation like that. So therefore, or your Eruv just wouldn't work. And that's why the Eruv doesn't work. So it doesn't work. So now the Gemara questions, why is this different than a different halacha, where we do seem to hold by two mutually exclusive options, right? Because that's what's happening here. They're two mutually exclusive options. If two people said to one person, go make an Eruv for each of us. So when he went and he did it before nightfall, right, even before twilight. Remember that an Eruv Tchumen has to be set up at twilight, right? Which normally we leave it all of Ben Hashmasha, but really it only needs to be there for when it becomes Shabbat. So now the question is, we never really know. Ben Hashmashot is maybe day, maybe night. We don't really know. So now we're going to say, if he said that, and one Irev Alav Mibod Yom, well, Echad Irev Alav Ben Hashmashot. He happened to put them down at different times. One before it started the sunset, and one after sunset before it got dark. Before 3 stars came out. Now it gets complicated because the Eruv he put out before Shabbat would have been fine had it stayed through all of Ben Hashmashot, but it got eaten at some point during Ben Hashmashot. And the one who he put it out later, which maybe he missed his window and maybe it was too late by the time he put it there, but it only got eaten after it was dark, meaning it was there for the period of Ben Hashmashot once he put it down. So one of their Eruvs is good, but we don't know which one. But you can't have that both of them are good. So again, it's a mutually exclusive option. And yet, what does the halacha say? Rava says, Shnehem kanu eruv. The Eruv works for both of them. So how does this work? So they say, oh, don't make a comparison between these two things. These two things are incomparable. Hachi hashta, hatam safek yamama safek lelia. There we're just not sure, is it day or is it night? Therefore, lo minka milta. It doesn't look like you're doing something that contradicts. That each one contradicts the other. It's not noticeable. Now, it's not exactly clear why this isn't noticeable. Why does it matter if it's noticeable? Because if it's noticeable to people that you're doing something that's ridiculous, then people are going to mock the halacha. We saw that before. Rashi says it here in Dibura Matchil Lo Minka Milta. V'lo havi mili derabanan ki chol chavi tilula. We don't want rabbinic law to end up being a mockery. People say this is ridiculous. You can't have your cake and eat it too. So therefore, in the case of Safek Yamama, Safek Lelia, it's not so noticeable. Now, why is it not so noticeable? It's not so clear. One explanation I saw was that time is not, it could be actually maybe even both of them were there when exactly Shabbat started, because Ben Hashmashot is, right, there was a time, it got in Ben Hashmashot, but maybe it was a little bit of Ben Hashmashot, and could have been an overlap in time where both of them were in existence. So it's not actually a pure, they're not mutually exclusive. But in our case, either you're going to view it as a house, and then you're going to view it as a house for both. Or you're going to view it as an entranceway, then and with that, Hadron al Hadar, we're going to finish this parak and move on to the next parak. The next parak is going to deal with when we're allowed to make an Eruv together and when we're not. Meaning, what if there's a wall in between us? Does the wall prevent us from being able to be together because there's a halachic wall in between? So that's a big question. So what makes it that houses or courtyards are allowed to, there has to be an opening between them. If you remember, we talked about making an Eruv between courtyards in a mavoi. So if you do it, a shituf in the alley, you can do it even if they're not open to each other, as long as they all open up to the mavoi. But we also saw cases where we made an Eruv between the chatzerot, the courtyards, not necessarily through the alley. If that's the case, that you do it between the chatzerot, well, then there has to be an entranceway, some sort of opening between the chatzerot, otherwise it won't work. So now we're going to talk about what kind of opening. Chalon sheben shtei chatzerot, arba'ah arba'ah. If you have a window between two chatzerot, remember the windows weren't glass paned windows, they were just open. If you have a window between two chatzerot, if it's 4x4, bitoch asara, it has to be within 10 tefachim of the ground. Ma'arvin shnayim, then they can each, ma'arvin shnayim means each can make an Eruv separately, okay? But because they have a wall there. But if they wanted to, they can make an Eruv altogether. What if it's less than 4 by 4? Now you could probably write the next sentence in the Mishnah, which is why the Gemara is going to question, why is this even here? If it's less than 4 by 4, or it's higher than 10 tefachim off the ground, why is that important? Because if you have a solid wall that's 10 tefachim high, that's your mechitza, that's a wall, that's a separation, that's a barrier, halachic wall. Therefore, we can't be together. So if you have a window, but the window is at a height above 10 tefachim, that's not going to help you. So therefore, in this case, marvim shnayim ve'ein marvin echad. We can make 2 separate eruvin. I can make and you can make on either side, but we cannot make an eruv together. So the Gemara starts off first with a different question. Should we say that our Mishnah is holding like Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel? Remember lavud? This is when you have a wall that doesn't reach the floor, for example, and it's within 3 tefachim of the ground, though we view it as if the wall goes all the way down to the floor, right? There's all sorts of laws of sukkah based on lavud. If you remember, lavud is generally 3 tefachim, but Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel has an opinion that lavud is 4 tefachim. So the fact that 4 tefachim is our number here, maybe this holds only like Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, and the rabbis would say 3 by 3. So they say no. Afilu tema kerabanan, ad kan lo pliga rabanan alei derashbag, ela linyan levudim. Their machloka was about lavud. Aval linyan pitcha, this is something different. This is what's considered a petach, an opening. For that, everyone agrees. Afilu rabanan modu diika arba'a chashiv v'lo lo chashiv. Anything less than 4 by 4 is just not an important, significant opening. Now moving on to the second sentence of the Mishnah, which we said was unnecessary. Pachome arba'a pshita. It's obvious. Since it already said it has to be 4 by 4 with a height of 10, within a height of 10. Mimela aniyadana. From there, I can obviously infer that if it's pachot me'arba'a, ulamala me'asara, if it's less than 4 by 4 or above 10, low, then it's not going to work. So, ha-kamash malan, what's this coming to teach you? Tama de kule lamala me'asara. This is to teach you that what? In order for it to be a problem, it has to be entirely above 10. But if a little bit of it was within 10 of the ground, meaning the window is mostly above 10, but a little bit of the window is below 10, then ma'arvin, ma'arvin shnayim, then they can make an eruv separately, but imratzu ma'arvin echad, but if they wanted, they could both make an eruv together. Now the Gemara says, we can even find support for this reading that we just explained, that even just a little bit has to be under 10 in a braita. Tanina lahad tanu rabanan, kulo lamala me'asara u'miktzatso b'toch hasara, or if it's all above 10, which really doesn't mean all, it means the majority is above 10 and a little bit is under 10, then it works, right? Then it's, or kulo b'toch hasara, again, we're going to have the same problem. The second line here is really unnecessary. If the majority is within 10 tefachim of the ground and only a little bit, miksato lamala me'asara, then also marvin shnayim v'imratzu marvin echad. So now the Gemara is going to question that second line. That's, what did we see here? First of all, it proved what we just said before, how we read our Mishnah, that the Mishnah tells us that second line to teach you that if a little bit is within 10, that's fine. You don't need most of the window to be within 10 tefachim of the ground. But now they're going to question this braita. If the majority of the windows, 10 tefachim, if most of it is above 10 tefachim and only a little bit is within 10 tefachim, you can still use this as an opening and make an eruv. So, if most of it is within 10 and only a little bit is above 10, mibaya, do I even need to ask that question? So the Gemara says, lo ve'ein sarich lomar zo katane. This is a structure we find very often in Braita and Mishnayot, that it's not only this, right? This is the case we want to teach you, and we don't even need to tell you, but we're going to tell you anyway, this other case, okay? It's obvious, but we're going to tell you anyway. That's that section. Now we're going to start a new section. It's connected, but it's a whole new thing. I'll already put up my screen. Okay, first I'll show you a picture of it, and then I'm going to use the whiteboard today, and I drew some diagrams to help you. So if you're not watching the YouTube, you might want to watch the YouTube. Okay, first we're starting with picture 245. Here we have our wall, and instead of being a square of 4 by 4, we have a circle. Here we're going to get into our favorite topic, mathematics in the Talmud, and how what's fascinating about it is you see how the rabbis view mathematics. And today in particular, it's a very complicated sugya, and that's because if you're trying to look at it from a mathematical perspective, much of what the Gemara is saying, not all of it, some of it actually matches perfectly with what we know for mathematics, but some of it is really not. And I think it's because their perception of how mathematics worked was very different. They don't do mathematics in an exact way. We know this from the fact that pi, remember, is not 3.14, et cetera, but 3. Okay, and that we're going to see in a minute. So their view of mathematics was kind of be'erech, like approximation. Okay, I would say it like that. It's kind of guesswork almost. So now they're going to say, if you have this Amar Rabbi Yochanan, chalon agol, if you have a round window, tzarich sheyehe behekefo 24 tvachim. It needs to have minimum, in order for it to have this 4 by 4 size. How do you translate that into a circle? Well, you need a circle that has a circumference of 24. Vishnayim v'mashu mehen, and 2 and a bit of them have to be betoch yud. What do we say? Only a little bit has to be within 10 tvachim. But if it's a circle, look at the picture. When you draw a square inside this circle, you're going to lose the bottom part of your circle. And we really are concerned with the square. So because of that, that bottom part is about 2. And therefore, we're going to say 2 and a bit have to be within 10. So that way your 2 gets erased because it's the circle and it's not part of the square. And then you have a little mashu, which is that little bit, that's enough that as long as the little bit is within 10 tvachim, you're good. Okay, that's not the real part about mathematics that we're going to get into, this 2 and how they got to 2. Some people say 2 is the height of the bottom of the circle. Some people say it's the circumference, like 2 and a bit of the circumference of the circle needs to be within that space. So now they say, why is that? She'im yirabenu, this I already explained. If you would square it off, nimtza mashu b'toch yud, you would have at least a little bit within 10. So now the Gemara is going to start questioning this 24. And for here, I'm going to pull up the whiteboard here in my Zoom. Switch to the whiteboard. Okay, so now here's my pictures that I have. Okay, we're going to start one by one. Okay, I've kind of put them all up so that they're there and I don't need to waste time drawing them, but we'll go one by one. So the Gemara questions, Michti, we have our formula. Michti, on account of, or now that we know, kol sheyesh be'kefo shlosha tvachim yesh bo b'ruchbo tefach. We know that the diameter of the circle is 1/3 of the size of the circumference. So therefore, why would we say 24? 24 would give us a diameter of 8. That's way more than our 4 by 4 tvachim. So therefore, bitrace our sage. Really 12 should be enough, because what does 12 get you? 12 divided by 3 is 4. And then you end up, here's our picture, with the circumference of the circle being 4. That's perfect. That would then, we assume, be about the size of the window. Now, it's not exactly true, because if you want to create a window that's 4 by 4, the 4 here is the diagonal. It's not the size of the square. So we're going to get back to that soon. So now the Gemara says, Hanimile be'igula, aval be'ribua be'inan tfei. 12 is too small, because now they don't exactly say it in the words that I just said it about the diagonal or the hypotenuse being 4, and that means the sides aren't. But I think they kind of had a sense, and what they're saying here, again, it's not so clear because they're not being exacting about their science, or their mathematics. But what they're saying is that's the circle being 4 is not going to give you enough to have a window of 4 by 4 within that if you're making a square out of it. So because of that, you're going to need more. Now, what do they do when you need more? Well, here also, this is the most complicated line in my mind, because it's all of a sudden where our picture is a square within a circle, right? We want to have a window within this circle, because we want to be able to know that there's enough space of 4 by 4, and that's why the circle is around, right? The square is within the circle. But now they're going to bring some formula that's talking about a circle inside a square, okay? And this is something we've learned before, okay? These are just, they're pulling out formulas that they have at their disposal. Kama meruba yeter alegul, how much, and there's another problem with this, which is this is really about area and not circumference and perimeter. But they seem, and maybe, and the Gemara is using it as if this is true also about the perimeter and the circumference. Kama meruba yeter al igul, how much more is a square than a circle? Rivia, a quarter more. Now, what's the tricky part here? Well, where are they going to use this formula? So what they do is they basically say, since the relationship between circle to square is 3 to 4, so let's take our 12 that we thought was for a square. And a few minutes ago, we said 12 is not enough. So we have, our circumference for our circle was 4. We want to basically jump it up a level. We want to say we need bigger if we're going to be able to have the square actually be 4 by 4. So the ratio between this and what we want to get to, let's raise it a quarter. In other words, they go back to this line that hanimili bi'igula but ribua bi'inantfe, you need more for the square. So what's going to be the ratio of how much more you're going to need to get from your 12 circumference, 4 diameter to where you're going to end up with the size of the square will be 4. Let's up it a quarter. Again, this is not a mathematical equation. And that's why if you try to view it that way, it's impossible to understand the sugya. But the way I understand it is that they're basically saying, let's just add another quarter to that number. They started with 24. They said, drop it to 12. No, that was too small. So if we're going to go up more, let's go up by a quarter. So what's a quarter? We're going to go up by 4 more. We're going to get to 16. So they say, b'shitzar sagya, maybe 16 should be enough. And again, remember, it's not that we started at 24 and we're just trying out different numbers. We started at 24 and Rabbi Yochanan said 24 is the number. This is the Gemara questioning and saying, it doesn't make sense. Sounds way too big. They tried 12, that's too small. So now they try 16. So now we're going down to the picture at the bottom. 16. Now what happens in 16? What's your diameter going to be? A third. Again, this is according to rabbinic law. So rabbinic mathematics. So a third is going to be 5.33. Okay? Now that doesn't help us yet because in a 5.33 hypotenuse, you're not going to have the other sides be 4. It's going to be less than 4 still. So that's not going to be so good either. Now, the Gemara doesn't exactly say why. But first of all, they say this whole quarter thing that you're doing is not the right ratio. Because why? And this is what I said in the beginning. Because hanimile gula de nothing miko ribua. That's when you have a circle within a square. Then the ratio square 4, circle 3, right? 3 to 4. But aval ribua did nothing migo igula, but the relationship between a square inside a circle to the circle is be'inantfe. You're going to need more than that. It's another way of saying it's not big enough. Okay, this is still not big enough, and why is that? Mishum morsha de karnata, because there's all these spaces when the corners of the square sit in the circle, but there's all these spaces in between that need to be filled in. So the ratio between the square to the circle is actually more. Okay, the circle needs to be bigger than this because of all these empty spaces. So now they're going to say, okay, well, still we're going to question. So yes, it's more than 16, but it still shouldn't be 24 because, and here they get to, this is the first real formula they're going to talk about that matches what we know to be. Since every ama beribua, every side of a square that's 1 cubit will be amta b'tchei chumshe ba'alachsona. It will be 1 2/5 on the diagonal. Okay, that means 1.4. So b'shivsar nechi chumsha sagya. So if you want to get 4 sides of 4 of the square drawn inside this triangle, what's going to be the hypotenuse there? 5.6, which means that your diameter of the circle is going to be 5.6 because it's the same. The hypotenuse of the square that you draw inside the circle and the circle itself, right? The diameter of the circle will be the same. If it's 5.6, multiply that by 3, you get 16.8. So 16 was close. So you see how their estimated mathematics kind of works, but it's close, but not there, not close enough. So therefore they say, so now we're back to, it should be 16.8, which really is 17 minus 1/5, the way they say it. So now we're back to struggling with where did Rabbi Yochanan get to this 24? So they basically end up with this answer, which is very complicated. And the Mefarshim really struggle, the commentators struggle to understand what this is, because They don't want to throw it out the window and say this is wrong. On the other hand, they know it's wrong, and they have to try to figure out how do we relate to this. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar ki Dayane de Kesari. They must say like the Dayanim of Caesarea, of Caesarea, the Amri like Rabbanan de Caesarea, either the Dayanim, the judges, or like the rabbis of Caesarea. De Amri igula migo ribua riva. Okay, again, these are the ratios. The ratio between a circle to the square when the square is bigger is a quarter, right? It's a quarter smaller. And ribua migo igula palga. If you have a square and you want to get the perimeter, you know the perimeter of the square, and you want to get to the circumference of the circle that's around it, what's the ratio? It's half, okay, so another way of saying palga is half, but what it means is it's 50% more. So in a 4x4 square, the perimeter is 16. What's going to be your circumference of the circle? It's going to be 50% more. That's going to get you up to 24. So that was their formula that they had. Now their formula isn't an accurate formula because we just proved that it's 16 perimeter and 16.8 circumference. So it's a bit of a problem. So as I said, the Mepharshim try to offer suggestions as to how they got to this when it's not actually the case. And they try to offer up different explanations. I'm going to just leave it as a question. Okay, moving on. So now we said if it's less than 4x4, then it's not an opening. And then we are not allowed to carry from one to the other. So now the Gemara is going to say, Amar Rav Nachman, Lo shanu ela chalon sheben shte chatzerot, aval chalon sheben shnei batim, afilu lamala me'asara, nami im ratzu la'arev ma'arvin echad. Okay, my taima beta kamanda male dami. They say this whole thing that has to be within 10 tvachim of the ground is only between courtyards, but in a house, since a house is full of furniture and things that go up higher in the house, therefore, even at and right, a house is looked as if it's full. We saw this in Masechet Shabbat, and therefore any height is fine. Okay, so if you have an opening, a window at any height, we basically can make an Eruvin between the houses, if it's like house to house. So now, Eitave Rava Rav Nachman. Rava brings a question of Rav Nachman. There's a source that says, this Tanaitic source, Echad li chalon sheben shtei chatzerot, ve'echad li chalon sheben shnei batim. Whether it's a window, I'm going to pull up the picture now. Whether it's a window between, okay, two houses, here you have houses, okay, here's the window between the two houses down at the bottom, or between the upper level of both houses, or between the roofs of the two houses, or between two rooms in the house. Okay, they don't exactly show that here. All these measurements are 4x4 with a height of 10. So what do you see? Even within the house, it needs a height of 10. So what did they answer? Tirguma achatzerot. Oh, explain that they really only mean 10 is really only for the courtyards. So the Gemara says, how could you say that? Ha'echalikatani, it says there. It's the same. You need 4x4 and a height of 10 in all of these cases, even the house. So what do they say? Tirguma arba al arba. No, the fact that it says echali, all these are the same, was about the requirement of the 4x4, but not the 10. There were two things mentioned there. So the one that repeats itself through all these cases is the 4x4, but not the height of 10. So now Rabbi Abba asked Rav Nachman the following question. What about this? The whole reason is because you have furniture and things in the house. Now, generally, where do you put your furniture? On the sides of the room. You don't generally stick furniture, a high thing in the middle of the room. So what if you have you have basically a hole in the ceiling, okay, like a window that leads, but a window in the ceiling that leads from this floor to the next floor. Not very accessible. And not where there's furniture in the middle of the room. So, tzarich sulam kavua la'atiro, do you need to have a permanent ladder there all the time? Oh, ein tzarich sulam kavua la'atiro, or maybe you don't need a permanent ladder. Ki amrina beta kamanda male dame, do we say, here are the two sides, a house is like it's full, that's hanimili minatzad, that's on the sides of the house. Aval be'emtza lo, but not in the middle of the house. O dilma lo shnar, do we say it doesn't make a difference? So amalei, eino tzarich, he answers him and says you don't need it. Now, when he heard the answer, Rabbi Abba asked Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman answered. When Rabbi Abba heard the answer, he thought, savor minei, because he asked about, do you need a permanent ladder? So he thought, whenever it says he thought, we're always going to say he was wrong. Sulam kavua hu deino tzarich. You don't need a permanent ladder, but ha sulam aray tzarich, but you do need a temporary ladder. But Itmar, it was said, Amar Rav Yosef bar Menyume, Amar Rav Nachman, Echad sulam kavua ve'echad sulam aray no tzarich. You don't need a permanent ladder. You don't even need a temporary ladder. New Mishnah, and we'll finish up with this Mishnah for today. Kotel shebein shtei chatzerot. Gavoa asara ve'rochav arba'a. If you have a wall between two courtyards, I'll pull up a picture, last picture for today. Okay, you have a wall. Actually, not the last picture. We have two more. You have a wall in between two courtyards. Now, how big is this wall? Gavoa asara ve'rochav arba'a. Does that sound familiar? Height of 10, width of 4. That means it's a reshut yachid. It's its own independent space. Therefore, marvin shnayim ve'ein marvin achad. These two courtyards cannot make an eruv together because there's a big wall in between them, a reshut yachid. What if, and this is the picture, hayu b'rosho perot, if sitting on the top of this wall were fruits, elu olim mikam v'ochlim ve'elu olim mikam v'ochlim. Each side can go up to the top of the wall and eat the fruits, but eat them only there. But you can't bring those fruits down because that's a space of reshut yachid, and your chatzir is a different space of reshut yachid, and you can't carry from one to the other. What if nifritza hakotel? Next picture, 248. What if you have a big opening in your courtyard? Okay, your wall broke. So if it's up to 10 cubits, this goes back to the beginning of the Masechet. We saw a lot about this 10 cubit measurement, specifically about a wall being breached. It was up to 10, including 10, was just an opening. Once it gets beyond 10, it's called a breach. So if it's nifritza kotel ad 10 amot, until 10 cubits, marvin shnayim v'martzu marvin echad. This could go both ways. We could say this is open. We could also say it's closed, and we could each make our own separate eruv. But why is that? Mipnei shu kepetach, because this is still just considered an opening. But yoter mikan, if it's more than this, then marvin echad ve'ein marvin shnayim. Now we get to the reverse of the cases we've been seeing until now. In this case, you have to make an eruv together. This is wide open. You can't say these are two separate courtyards anymore because the wall was breached. And therefore, the only way to do it is to all make an eruv together. If we made an eruv and the other side made an eruv separately and we didn't join together, we'd forbid everybody and no one could carry anywhere. Okay, with that, we'll finish for today. Shabbat shalom or Shavua tov to everybody. And we will pick up on Sunday morning.